My family ranch sat on the edge of a growing suburban development for 3 generations. The wide-open plains where I raised my small herd of bison provided a buffer between my quiet country lifestyle and the encroaching neighborhood with its strict homeowners association. I never imagined the collision course our worlds were on. For years, I maintained a cordial but distant relationship with the development and its residents. Some neighbors appreciated the rustic charm my property added to their community views, while others saw my land as an untapped resource for their expanding suburban vision. The HOA president, Richard Thornton, fell firmly in the latter category. A former real estate developer with political aspirations, Richard ran the association like his personal fiefdom, using the HOA bylaws as weapons against anyone who opposed his vision. I first noticed his interest in my property during their annual meeting, to which I was surprisingly invited despite not being a member. Richard spoke enthusiastically about community expansion opportunities while repeatedly glancing in my direction. The proposal included plans for recreation areas that suspiciously bordered my land. I dismissed it initially as ambitious dreaming, not realizing that Richard had already set his plan in motion. Within weeks, surveyors appeared along my property line, claiming they were just updating county records. Looking back, I should have recognized these warning signs, but my attention was focused on my bison herd's health during the calving season. Little did I know that my beloved animals would soon become unexpected allies in the most dramatic confrontation of my life. The trouble began on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday when an official-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a notice from the HOA claiming that a small section of my southern pasture, approximately 2 acres, actually fell within their jurisdiction due to an overlooked boundary adjustment during the original development construction. According to their documentation, this strip of land had been designated as community space in the original plans, but was never properly transferred. The letter included surveyor reports, county filing numbers, and a cordial but firm statement that they would be reclaiming this space for community use. I immediately contacted my lawyer, Benjamin Hayes, who had helped with property matters since my father's passing. Benjamin expressed serious concerns about the claim but advised caution. "These boundary disputes can get complicated," he explained. "The documentation looks professionally prepared, but something does not add up." We arranged to meet with the county clerk to examine the original property records that weekend. In the meantime, Richard Thornton wasted no time. The very next morning, I awoke to the sound of machinery at my southern fence line. A crew was installing temporary stakes with bright orange markers. When I confronted them, the foreman handed me a work order signed by Richard himself, authorizing preliminary work for what was described as the Lakeside Acres Community Recreation Center and event space. The workers appeared uncomfortable, but continued their tasks under my watchful eye. That evening, I received multiple calls from sympathetic neighbors warning me that Richard had announced a massive community barbecue event scheduled for the following month, to be held on the newly acquired community recreation grounds. My blood boiled as I realized he was creating a public spectacle, specifically to solidify his claim on my land. The next 2 weeks dissolved into a bureaucratic nightmare. Benjamin and I discovered that someone had indeed filed amended property line documents with the county, paperwork that contained my apparent signature, though the forgery was obvious to anyone who knew my handwriting. We immediately filed a complaint alleging document fraud, but the wheels of justice turned frustratingly slowly. Meanwhile, Richard escalated his efforts. Construction equipment appeared at the boundary line, and workers began clearing the disputed area for what was clearly going to be a large event space. When I attempted to stop them, I was served with a temporary restraining order preventing me from interfering with legitimate HOA business. The document cited the questionable boundary adjustment as established fact. My attempts to speak directly with HOA board members proved futile. Richard had effectively isolated them from any outside communication, claiming I was becoming increasingly hostile and potentially dangerous. More concerning was the discovery that Richard had connections within the county permit office. Our fraud complaint was repeatedly misplaced or under review, while the HOA's permits for construction and event planning sailed through approvals without the standard waiting periods. Benjamin grew increasingly concerned. "They are manipulating the system," he explained during a tense meeting in his office. "If they hold this event and publicly utilize the land without effective opposition, it strengthens their adverse possession claim in court." We filed emergency motions with the court to halt the construction, but our hearing date was scheduled for 3 weeks later, conveniently the day after the planned community barbecue. Even more alarming were the promotional materials that began circulating throughout the neighborhood and on social media. The event was being billed as the inaugural Lakeside Acres Summer Celebration, featuring food vendors, live entertainment, and activities for hundreds of guests. Richard had transformed a land grab into a community celebration, positioning himself as the visionary leader who had expanded community recreation options. With legal avenues temporarily blocked, I attempted direct negotiation. I requested a meeting with the full HOA board, hoping that reasonable minds would prevail once they understood the situation. Richard could not reasonably refuse such a request without appearing dictatorial to the other board members. The meeting was set for the community center on a Thursday evening. I arrived prepared with my documentation, historical property surveys, and witness statements from longtime residents who could confirm the traditional boundaries. The atmosphere in the room was tense as I methodically presented my case. Several board members appeared genuinely concerned by the evidence of document manipulation. Richard, however, remained unmoved. "These are simply the desperate accusations of someone unwilling to accept progress," he announced to the room. "Our legal team has verified all documentation. The land in question has always been part of the development plans. Mr. Anderson has simply enjoyed unauthorized use of community property for years due to administrative oversight." When questioned about the timing and convenience of this discovery, Richard smoothly pivoted to enthusiastic descriptions of the upcoming celebration event. "Just imagine the community pride we will foster. Children playing in the new recreation area, families bonding over shared meals, building the kind of neighborhood connection that raises property values and quality of life simultaneously." His rhetoric was effective. I watched as initially sympathetic board members were gradually seduced by the vision he painted. By meeting's end, only 2 members still expressed reservations, not enough to challenge Richard's authority. As I left the meeting, Richard approached me with a condescending smile. "You should join us for the barbecue," he said. "It might help you see the benefits of community involvement." His smug certainty made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. "This is not over, Richard," I responded quietly. "That land has been in my family for generations. You cannot simply take what does not belong to you." His smile never faltered. "The paperwork says otherwise. I suggest you come to terms with progress, Mr. Anderson. The celebration begins at noon on Saturday week. Perhaps seeing the community enjoyment will help you accept the inevitable." The day before the planned barbecue, I received devastating news. The judge had denied our emergency motion without a hearing, citing insufficient evidence of irreparable harm and deferring the matter to the regularly scheduled court date after the weekend. Benjamin was furious. "This is unprecedented," he fumed over the phone. "Someone has clearly influenced the process." As we spoke, I watched from my kitchen window as rental trucks delivered tables, chairs, and large party tents to the disputed area. Workers erected a temporary stage and set up cooking equipment for what was clearly going to be a massive event. Marketing materials promised food, music, and activities for an expected 300 attendees. My property, land that had been in my family for generations, was being transformed before my eyes into a suburban playground without my consent. That afternoon, I drove to the feed store in a daze, my mind racing with helpless anger. While loading supplements for my Bison, I overheard two men discussing the upcoming event. "Thornton really pulled it off," one said admiringly. "Heard he is announcing his run for county commissioner tomorrow at the barbecue. This whole community expansion thing is his campaign launch in disguise." The casual revelation hit me like a physical blow. This was not simply about land. Richard was using my property as a stepping stone for his political ambitions. The final straw came that evening when I discovered workers installing permanent concrete footings for what appeared to be a large monument sign reading, "Lakeside Acres Community Recreation Grounds," dedicated by Richard Thornton, HOA president. They were not simply using my land temporarily. They intended permanent alterations that would be difficult to reverse even with a court victory. I retreated to my house, a storm of emotions raging within me. Generations of my family had worked this land, respected it, and preserved it against development pressures. The thought of it being carved up for a political publicity stunt was unbearable. As darkness fell, I sat on my porch watching the lights from the event preparation glowing on the horizon. My bison herd grazed peacefully in the north pasture, separated from the disputed area by a simple interior fence, a fence that had never been designed to contain determined animals if they were motivated to move. A plan began forming in my mind. Not a plan to harm anyone, but a plan to make a statement that could not be ignored or bureaucratically sidestepped. If Richard wanted to use my land without permission, perhaps he should experience the full reality of ranch life, not just the sanitized version he was selling to his suburban constituents. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for an outdoor celebration. From my vantage point, I watched as vendors set up food stations, entertainers tested sound equipment, and early volunteers arranged decorative touches throughout the disputed area. By 11 o'clock, the first guests began arriving. Families with excited children, elderly couples carrying folding chairs, and groups of neighbors walked across the boundary onto my property as if they had every right to be there. Richard arrived with an entourage of important-looking individuals, likely potential political supporters. He wore a custom polo shirt emblazoned with Lakeside Acres Community Celebration and moved through the growing crowd like a politician on the campaign trail. By noon, the celebration was in full swing. Hundreds of people filled the area, consuming barbecue from multiple smoking grills, enjoying live music from the temporary stage, and participating in various lawn games and activities. Children bounced in inflatable play structures while adults mingled around cocktail tables. Richard took the stage shortly after noon, tapping the microphone to gather attention. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his voice booming across my property. "Welcome to the first annual Lakeside Acres Summer Celebration. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our community, one where we expand our horizons and create spaces for connection and recreation. The crowd applauded enthusiastically as Richard continued his self-congratulatory speech. As your HOA president, I have always believed in bold vision and decisive action. Today, we stand on the fruits of that vision, 2 beautiful acres of community recreation space that had previously been inaccessible to residents. More applause followed as Richard detailed his tireless efforts to reclaim the land for community use. He strategically avoided mentioning that the land belonged to me, instead framing the situation as a correction of historical oversight. As his speech reached its climax, Richard prepared to make his long-anticipated political announcement. And friends, it is with great pride that I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for county commissioner. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. That was my cue. While Richard basked in adulation, I quietly opened the interior fence gate separating my north pasture from the disputed land. My bison herd, 27 magnificent animals weighing between 1,000 and 2,000 pounds each, had been feeding near the gate all morning, curious about the unusual activity. Now, with the barrier removed and a gentle encouragement from me, they began moving toward the celebration grounds. Bison are naturally curious but generally peaceful animals unless threatened. They are also imposing, unpredictable, and command immediate respect from anyone with common sense. I did not intend for anyone to be injured, merely surprised and inconvenienced by the reality that this land was still very much a working ranch. The first indication that something was amiss came when a woman at the edge of the gathering let out a startled scream. Heads turned toward the sound, and conversations faltered as people became aware of the approaching animals. Richard paused mid-sentence, his triumphant expression freezing as he spotted the lead bull, an 18-year-old patriarch weighing nearly 2,000 pounds, ambling casually toward the celebration area. What followed was magnificent chaos. Panic spread through the crowd as people scrambled to move away from the approaching herd. Tables overturned, sending plates of barbecue flying. The inflatable bounce houses deflated as parents grabbed their children and retreated. The bison, for their part, seemed more interested in the abandoned food than the fleeing humans. They moved methodically through the celebration space, helping themselves to unattended plates and knocking over decorations with their massive bodies. From the safety of my porch, I watched the spectacle unfold. The exodus was remarkably quick. Within 15 minutes, the celebration grounds were entirely abandoned by humans and thoroughly claimed by bison. Tables lay overturned, the stage stood empty with the microphone still producing feedback, and abandoned personal belongings scattered across the trampled grass. My animals contentedly investigated the leftovers, seeming to enjoy the variety compared to their usual diet. Richard was among the last to leave, his face contorted with rage as he spotted me observing from a distance. He shouted something unintelligible before being hurried to safety by his entourage. I knew there would be consequences, but I had documented everything. My security cameras had captured the entire sequence of events, including Richard's speech claiming my land and announcing his political aspirations. Benjamin arrived within the hour, alerted by my phone call. He surveyed the scene with a mixture of professional concern and poorly concealed amusement. "Well," he said finally, "this certainly changes the nature of our case." The media arrived shortly thereafter. Apparently, a bison disruption at a community event was too interesting to ignore. Local news crews filmed the abandoned celebration grounds from a respectful distance while my animals continued their leisurely exploration. I gave a single statement. These are private ranch lands that have been in my family for generations. The animals were simply grazing on their normal territory. By evening, county officials had arrived to assess the situation. The sheriff, a reasonable man who had known my family for years, listened to both sides of the story with professional neutrality. Richard demanded my arrest for reckless endangerment and criminal property damage. In response, Benjamin presented our evidence of document fraud and the denied emergency motion. The sheriff ultimately departed without making any arrests, promising only a full investigation into all aspects of the situation. The following days brought unexpected developments. The incident had gone viral on social media, with videos of well-dressed suburbanites fleeing from Bison shared widely across multiple platforms. Public opinion, initially mixed, shifted decisively in my favor when investigative reporters uncovered Richard's connections to the county permit office and the irregularities in the boundary documentation. 3 days after the incident, I received a call from the county executive's office. The property dispute was being given priority review, and an independent survey team would reassess all boundaries immediately. Richard's political aspirations evaporated in the wake of the scandal. The HOA board, embarrassed by the negative publicity and facing angry questions from homeowners about the failed event and potential legal liability, called an emergency meeting. By week's end, Richard had been removed as president, and the HOA had formally withdrawn all claims to my property. The legal resolution came more swiftly than anyone anticipated. With Richard's influence neutralized and public attention focused on the case, the county judge expedited our hearing. The evidence of document fraud was reviewed, and the original property boundaries were officially reaffirmed. My land remained my land, exactly as it had been for 3 generations. Benjamin successfully argued for damages related to the unauthorized use of my property and the installation of permanent fixtures without consent. The HOA insurance policy ultimately covered the costs, with a settlement that not only compensated me financially, but also included a formal written apology to be distributed to all Lakeside Acres residents. Richard faced more serious consequences. The investigation into the document fraud led to criminal charges for forgery and filing false records. His political career ended before it officially began. His reputation in the community, once sterling, was irreparably damaged. Several months later, his house in Lakeside Acres was quietly listed for sale. The most satisfying outcome, however, was the changed relationship with my neighbors. Many residents from the development approached me individually in the weeks following the incident, offering apologies for their participation and expressing admiration for my unorthodox but effective defense of my property rights. Ironically, Richard's vision of community connection did materialize, just not in the way he had intended. Several families asked permission to visit my ranch legitimately, curious about the bison that had become minor celebrities. This led to educational opportunities I had never considered. With proper safety measures in place, I began hosting small, authorized tours of the ranch for interested neighbors. Children learned about sustainable ranching practices and wildlife conservation. Adults gained appreciation for the agricultural heritage of the area that had preceded their suburban development. By the following summer, we had established a proper community event, one based on mutual respect rather than appropriation. The annual Ranch Heritage Day became a tradition, held on my property with my explicit permission and collaboration. The celebration included properly permitted food vendors, educational stations about local history and wildlife, and supervised viewing areas where visitors could observe the bison from a safe distance. Unlike Richard's power grab disguised as community service, this event genuinely benefited everyone involved. My family ranch continues to operate as it has for generations, the boundary lines clear and undisputed. The bison herd, unwitting heroes in this suburban drama, graze peacefully in their pastures. Occasionally, I catch them watching the suburban homes in the distance, perhaps reminiscing about their brief adventure into civilization. And sometimes, when new neighbors move into lakeside acres, they hear the story from long-time residents, a cautionary tale about respecting boundaries and the day when nature reclaimed its territory from those who had attempted to steal it.